counter the lies that are being told. So as I've given you obviously examples where the politicians have claimed that they're making their own laws and they're just doing the European Union's bidding, but also to make, as you say, to restore a sense of nationhood, to make people realise they don't have to be servile. There's nothing wrong with the nation state. The nation state's what's made Europe such a great continent. That's what I think we really need to do.
I'm looking at specific crises such as, the banking crisis when we left the European Union, when we left the monetary union, with the exchange rate mechanism, and that brought the issue to the forefront about who controls the British economy. Do you think there's any specific crisis out there which would really jog the British people into rebelling against the European project? A big crisis, a crisis where our sovereignty will come in collision with the rule of Brussels? Because that seems to be the only way that we're going to rouse the British people in a dramatic sense to desire to reclaim the sovereignty. I mean, we've had an incremental loss of sovereignty. You could say we could have an incremental awakening of the British people to reclaim it. But I think there needs to be some sort of crisis. Will it be an economic one? You talked about the European Union being determined by economics, such as the coal and steel union. Do you think it will be some sort of economic... We're not in the euro, are we?
No.
But we will be affected by the collapse of the euro.
Yeah, inevitably we will, because we're still part of the ERM, so we will be. It could be an economic crisis, it could be a political one. If there's a common foreign policy and the European Union does something which the people find repellent, then that could be something which will propel people to oppose it. Or if we lose our seat, which is a real possibility in the Security Council, but on the other hand, to the average person on the street, that may not mean a lot. So it probably is incumbent on us to educate people, because they're so used to being servile. They're not used to demanding things which really should be the preserve of anybody who lives in a free, democratic nation state.
So if we want freedom, we should vote for the UK Independence Party?
It's apart from the BNP, it's the only... And for obvious reasons, people may not want to support the BNP, but we're the only party, really, apart from them, who are opposed to the European Union.
The loss of borders might become a substantial issue. I mean, the scale of immigration, people feeling they're being overwhelmed. If we desire to gain control of our borders again, that might require us to leave the European Union. That could be a sufficient enough reason.
Well, unquestionably, it does require us to leave if we want to control our borders. And that's actually potentially, if you have some kind of civil unrest that can be directly attributed to the European Union and the lack of border control, then that is something that could prompt such severe riots, for example. I mean, some of the riots that have been going on in France, if they were to happen here, maybe that's the sort of thing that could hopefully wake people up to the reality, the political reality, and to what our politicians have actually done gradually over the years.
I think that anybody who's engaged with this doesn't understand the European Union. Well, they understand like immigration and that, but they're not into it in a deep way.
It's understandable with the look at the mainstream media. The best, you might get the tabloids citing the odd absurd decision by the European Union, but they don't really conceptualise it properly. They don't actually call for us to leave. And the BBC, for example, is now officially biased in favour of the European Union. They even get loans and grants from the European Union, which they wouldn't be entitled to unless they're perceived to be furthering the European Union's interest.
Those grants are only our money that we put in. We put the biggest budget. We're paying out less.
Are you talking about the CAP now?
You don't know other things they're going to bring out. You don't know if they're going to bring a European wage structure out.
Well, it's possible. I mean, there's already a minimum wage here, but if there wasn't, I'm sure they would be looking for that. And there's a social chapter, which allegedly we've opted out of. But again, that's slightly misleading to claim that we've opted out of it.
There's a lot of jobs being created in the NHS where they didn't have to. So the expense of the NHS is rocketed because of the European Time Directive. So doctors can only work 48 hours a week. Now, the trainee doctors, whereas they used to work longer and get more and better quality training, and they're all up in arms about it, but we're in the European Union and can't do anything about it.
Exactly, and even if people agree with particular decisions, what you've got to remind them is they had no say over that decision. It's a fluke that they may happen to agree with it, but it came from there's no such thing as a benevolent dictatorship, and it came from a dictatorship essentially. So you've got to remind people of where these laws are coming from.
People are selfish, aren't they? They're selfish and complacent. But it doesn't really affect them.
Joe said, the government are European citizens, they accept it.
And actually,
We vote like...
About you say that the idea of the European Union was actually born after the First World War.
Yes.
The carnage of the Great War and the
Yeah.
struggle between nation states. But isn't it true that supranational, sort of multinational European constructions have existed since the Roman Empire? And you also see that with Catholicism, of course, was a supernatural body. And you find that most Catholic nations in the European Union are not sceptical about the structure of the European Union.
Then they
Now,
may be, yeah.
Just finish this, because so the idea of a supernatural Europe, of a united Europe, is actually quite an ancient idea. Now, from the collapse of the empires,
Supernatural Europe.
Supernational, yeah. Following the collapse of the European empires after the First World War, First and Second World Wars, we've actually become quite small again, haven't we? For a period, we were just a nation state. We were just by ourselves, islands in the North Atlantic. Now, given that there's these huge trading blocks around the world, think of the North American treaty between Canada, Mexico and the United States, and in the Far East there's the scale of China. Is it feasible really to exist as a small nation state in the 21st century?
Well, I think it is, because firstly, we were in a trading bloc before, a genuine trading bloc, before we joined the European Union. That's the Economic Free Trade Agreement, which Iceland, I think Lithuania are also members of, and Norway. And those countries are by and large far richer than the European Union. They still trade with the European Union without paying any of the tariffs. So they, in a nutshell, they get the economic benefits of it without losing any of their political sovereignty. Even if, though, we weren't in another trading bloc and we had to pay the common external tariff, which is inconceivable because we import more from the EU than we export, most economists have accepted that we would still be better off overall. I think there's on the Civitas website, there's a report by somebody called Ian Milne called Better Off Out. And it's a very brief, it's only 3 or 4 pages, but it explains exactly why we would be economically better off leaving the European Union. And it refutes a lot of the common arguments and a lot of the deception that's been propagated by some of the politicians. I'm sorry, I forgot the other part of the question. Oh, you're saying...
It's essentially a political one. Will we have the political clout? I mean, one of the reasons we claim that we need European unity is that we can compete with these massive global blocs.
Yeah.
Will we be large enough to have our voice heard in the international arena if we stand alone?
Well, if we don't stand alone and we're morphed into the European Union, there's no incentive for these big powers to talk to us directly, is there? So if you look at, for example, the amount of presidential visits that some of these smaller countries in EFTA have had, like Norway, it's actually just far more than what we've had. Despite us being a much larger country, a much larger defence budget and larger economy, we've I think had less presidential visits from the then George Bush than Norway has, if I'm not mistaken. So no, and by definition, if you morph into one superstate, you have less influence. And we're still a permanent member of the Security Council. And of course, it's not just about the foreign affairs and the ability to influence things on the world stage. The most important priority should be our own freedom within our own borders, and we're losing that. And you can't put a price on that.
You could make contracts with the ex-Commonwealth countries, which are up and coming.
We had that before, and another thing you'll find, if you do get a chance to read this book, is the devastating effect this had on the Commonwealth countries. And in fact, how much cheaper the food was being imported from those countries than it was from the heavily subsidised